The question I would get almost every time for a while was, well, how does this affect hiring in sales? Do we now need to hire salespeople who are really good with AI prompts? And my response was always, that's a bit like 40 years ago saying, I'm running a telemarketing center. I better hire people who know how to use the phone. No, that's not the key skill. The key skill remains selling, closing, relationship building.
Welcome to the Emblazers Show, where B2B leaders are igniting revenue. I'm your host, Abby Kerr. And on today's episode, my colleague Tim Riesterer is speaking with Frank Cespedes about AI in sales without the hype. They unpack why AI will never replace strong sales fundamentals and where it can actually improve performance right now, from cleaner focus to freeing reps up to sell. But first, let's learn a little bit more about Frank. Frank Cespedes taught at Harvard Business School, where he led core MBA courses in strategy, marketing, and entrepreneurial management, and developed courses in sales and selling, B2B marketing, and customer discovery, as well as teaching in executive programs. He previously spent 12 years as managing partner at a professional services firm and has worked with companies worldwide on go-to-market and strategy issues, serving on boards in consumer goods, industrial products, services, PE, and VC firms. Frank has written for publications including Harvard Business Review, California Management Review, and the Wall Street Journal, and is the author of 6 books, including Aligning Sales and Strategy, cited as the best sales book of the year by Strategy and Business, a must-read by Gartner, and perhaps the best sales book ever by Forbes. His newest book is Sales Management That Works: How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing, published by Harvard Business Review Press. Let's go to the episode with Tim and Frank right now.
Frank, it's great to have you. There's a couple of reasons I'm so excited. Is like we haven't had a chance to have this kind of conversation. We've always been in larger crowds. But here's how I see this. We have to talk about AI. But what I love about your approach is 2 things. One, when I read your stuff and listen to you, you have a very forward, research-backed look at sales performance management. But at the same time, you don't get caught up in these hype cycles in a way that like you breathlessly are bleeding us into the future. So I can't wait for today. My expectation is you're going to deal with AI in a realistic, pragmatic way. But at the end, our listeners are going to hear ways right now to improve sales performance management. Is that too high a bar? Did I do that okay?
Well, first, Tim, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to converse with you. And secondly, I will take any flattery I can get. And after that introduction, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say.
Well, right. And that's the kind of tease that we love to start with. So let's just start as I look at your latest work and commentaries on things. You express that the fundamentals of selling and performance management are still true, have never been probably potentially more true as AI starts to flood the tech stack. Tell me more about like your current POV, as the kids say, on what's going on out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, artificial intelligence is a big deal, right? And we're only in the early stages of that technological revolution. You and I think neither of us would deny that. But let's look at some of the business basics. AI is available to everybody, right? It's not like, it's some secret thing that only X companies have. It is both a performance enhancer if it is used correctly, but it's also by itself another cost of doing business. And by itself, it is not a source of competitive advantage. It's only advantage if it's used in connection to enhance the performance of the fundamentals. And for that reason, I would argue that doing the basics right in your business, by the fundamentals, I mean, do you understand and do you manage the key drivers of performance in your particular sales model? For lots of reasons, AI makes that even more important, not less important.
Elaborate on that a little bit, because I can guess at the heart of that is if your fundamentals, your process, and then the data it throws off are not good. AI is an augmentation, and all you're going to get is more not good. So, like, what are those things that have to be in place, have to be verified, have to be literally locked and loaded and repeated for us to comfortably layer some AI on it for help?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are some of the things that AI, I think, especially in sales, is particularly good for? One thing it's obviously very good for, and, quite honestly, especially in B2B enterprise sales, salespeople no longer have any excuse for this. It's very good at getting you information about your target markets, target segments, and your target accounts. But it's only as good as your knowledge of who it is you do and do not focus on. So I think it makes, I'll use the current jargon, it makes ideal client profiles even more important. Secondly, it is very good, and this is for me the low-hanging fruit about AI. Companies that are not using it for this, shame on them. It's very, very good at freeing up sales reps' time from the administrative tasks that have increasingly encroached on their time. But again, if you're a sales leader, you need to know the difference between cutting fat and cutting bone. You've got to know which tasks are the ones that, guess what? The bot can do 80% of that. Why should my people spend time on that? Versus this is a task that I need the human being and their accrued judgment and experience to do. Those are the things I mean by the fundamentals. And ultimately, in my view, it's what sales leaders get paid for.
So some of the research, because there's so much available information anymore. And what I love is it's no longer about, this is what I've seen happen. We've moved from, I have to be a spectacular prompt engineer and tailor this prompt, to everything's become more, I'll call it contextually aware, where now the AI is prompting me to say, I need a little more information, or please answer this question and I'll make it better. So like it's improving that way. And then the admin task that you mentioned, but there are jobs to be done by salespeople that if we abdicate, I think you're familiar with Lef Bonnie. He's doing some work at Florida State on cognitive surrender. We're hearing it all the time around AI. And like all of a sudden we let AI do some things that we should be doing, and then we lose that muscle and we can't advance the cause. I know there was a lot in there. So I guess the question is, though, you told us about some things that it works for and can do right. Where are people overreaching and potentially causing some problems down the road that they're not thinking of right now with AI?
I would point to two things. The first, and I must confess, this is moving so fast, I'm hearing less of this, but with all truth, and you know this, Tim, this is not the first podcast I've been on about AI in sales. I probably a dozen or more over the last 18 months. And the question I would get almost every time for a while was, well, how does this affect hiring in sales? Do we now need to hire salespeople who are really good with AI prompts? And my response was always, that's a bit like 40 years ago saying, I'm running a telemarketing center. I better hire people who know how to use the phone. No, that's not the key skill. The key skill remains selling, closing, relationship building. So that's one. The other, though, I think is a more insidious one. And I think you pointed to it in your comments, the notion that somehow the technology, artificial intelligence, which is very, very impressive and going to get even more impressive, but the notion that somehow that can substitute for a coherent sales model, or even worse, make up for a flawed business strategy. It cannot. It is one tool among others. It is not the same as a coherent sales model or a coherent business strategy. And then the third thing, and I think this is not so much a mistake, but what I think is increasingly a realization of companies, AI does not repeal the basic technology commandment of garbage in, garbage out, right? The key issue with all AI systems. I'm on the board of a company. We sell this to companies. The key issue is the data. And when you look at the implementation of AI in sales organizations, the major data they use is whatever's in their CRM system. And I think most sales leaders begin to appreciate that that's probably the noisiest data in the company, not because of the software, nothing wrong with the software, but as usual in business because of the human inputs. You say that a lead is somebody that you've met, you talk to, they're in the market, and they have a budget. And I say a lead is anybody I bumped into at Harvard Square. All the CRM system does is aggregate those very subjective responses. That's got to be cleaned up. And that's not a trivial task. It's going to take some time in order to get real value from what is revolutionary technology, but it's not the same as selling and it's not the same as business strategy.
So if you walked into an org today, would you know pretty quickly if they were getting some value from their AI or if they were just adding noise on top of noisy data? How would that flash for you?
By the way, I think the distinction you just made is very well put. I don't think it's that difficult to figure it out. Time is money in most sales organizations. So what I look to, and I don't think, I think we're already at the stage with the technology where you can get measurable results from this. Are we saving time and enhancing the productivity of our people by freeing them up from administrative tasks or whatever? The data here tends to surprise most executives. But if you ask yourself a basic question about sales, how much time does the average rep spend in customer contact? And by customer contact, I don't just mean making a pitch virtually or in person. I mean all forms, webinars, Zoom, whatever. The data varies, but on average, it's between 30 to 35%, right? That low. Now imagine if you can make that 40 or 45 or 50% or more. Not only is that a very big productivity boost in most companies, it also increases the total addressable market with better go-to-market utilization. And AI can already make appreciable advances in that area. So I look at time savings first and foremost.
So there's so much in what you just said, Frank, that I'm going to try and pace myself as I ask these questions. But you mentioned, for example, the CRM. The tech does what the tech is supposed to do. The problem has always been what people do or don't put in it and how good it is. So this still becomes a people problem. And now let's just say the AI has reduced the time taken for administrative tasks. And I move from 30% customer contact time to I now have 60% customer contact time. It doesn't mean they're any better at customer contact. Like all that would do is reveal that maybe I was hiding behind my admin tasks. So I know you talk a lot about the problem isn't the tool, the problem is execution. So now, let's say, okay, the company's saving some time. How do you spot execution problems and think about performance management of that newly available time?
Yeah, well, I think that gets us back to your initial question, the fundamentals. And here I think the fundamentals are, as usual in business, about strategy on the one hand, execution on the other. On the execution side, how good are my people when they're in front of customers, right? At the end of the day, that is what salespeople are about. And we still have to be instigating a continuous improvement cycle there, especially because we now have more time to potentially call on more customers. And then on the strategy side, the issue is, does our strategy make clear where we play and where we don't play? So that as we free up this time, we're still dealing with customers that are responsive to our value proposition, our product, our pricing, etc., as opposed to wandering off in markets or segments where we have no business being. Again, AI can't fix those issues. Sales leaders and the people that help to develop and execute strategy have to fix those issues.
So let's take a look at strategy and execution as two separate questions now. And so in follow-up to that point, which I 100% agree with, I like to say it's important that you know how to run an engagement, but the thing that really makes a difference is the experience you do or don't create when you're in front of a customer with your lips moving. What are you seeing now, either in the tools or the approaches companies are taking to make sure their teams are better in that area, in the experience that they create? Are you big on like reviewing call transcripts and emails and identifying coachable moments? Like, how do we help people get better now that they get more time to do it? How do we make them better at it?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. First, I am big on exactly what you said, reviewing the transcripts, coaching, etc. I'm seeing a couple of areas. One is the bots that with the right inputs, right? In other words, inputs that are relevant to the buying processes at my target customers, my sales process. There are now many, many more opportunities and frankly, less expensive opportunities where salespeople can practice and practice and practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And by the way, they can do it on their time. We don't have to bring everybody in, to the office for training. At the other end, however, that gap between strategy and sales, that remains. And it remains there, I think, for lots of generic reasons in many, many companies that include but go beyond sales. And, for me, I always point to three areas there that, again, I think AI should force leaders to examine. The first issue, and the most common in my experience, is a dirty secret about most companies. They don't have a coherent business strategy. They've got a mission, they got a purpose, they got a vision, they got some fancy statement on the website, but they do not necessarily have a business strategy. Choices about where we play and don't play, who our target customers are, how we get from here to there. That you got to fix. The second, and this is a big enterprise company issue, usually, the gap, the planning cycles in companies. The latest research indicates that the typical planning cycle in a Fortune 500 company is now about 6 to 9 months. Think about that. While that's going on, the market is doing what the market has to do, and salespeople have to respond in market time, not planning time. So even if the company comes up with a great strategy, a big if, is very often irrelevant to what the salespeople have had to do. And then the third issue in many companies is simply the sales compensation system. In most companies, about 70% sales comp, the variable comp is driven by volume, which for the salesperson means there is no such thing as a bad customer. I bring them in, I get my bogey met, you figure out what to do with it. So even if you've got the strategy that clarifies who our customers are, there's that misfit with the incentives and the behavior that it's providing at the point of sale. So I think those are the issues that I see.
So I love them as issues. Let's see if we can hang sort of a practical, do something different, better tomorrow onto each of those. And I'm going to go in reverse order. So sales compensation and driving the right behaviors to make sure that the plan you've laid out and the strategy you've laid out is actually executed in the deals you take down. Not only the deals you take down, how you take them down. And that's even going to be shifting because the way we're pricing and the way value is managed is changing, whether it's per seat to outcomes to consumption, whatever it is. So let's start with that one as you think about compensation tied to performance management and how that drives plans and strategy. I hope it's okay if I go in reverse order. So so talk to me about how comp plans need to be changing from traditional approaches.
Well, let's start with why they are what they are for the most part, because the data point I'm going to cite has been remarkably consistent, Tim, throughout my balding career. Give or take a few percentage points every year, About 70% of companies tie compensation bonus in sales to volume, not profitability of the sale, not cost to serve a given customer, but volume. And that leads to the behavior I mentioned. There's no such thing as a bad customer. Now, why do companies do that? Certain companies do it because volume, which is usually a surrogate for market share, is in fact important in their business because there are operating efficiencies that are driven by that. But in my experience, that only explains a minority of that 70% figure. Other companies are just lazy. This is the easiest thing we can do, that we can track. And the third is a data information systems issue. They know that volume may not be the best metric for judging sales outcomes, but that's all that our IT systems can do on a reasonably responsive basis. If we wanted to comp them on some other metrics, our IT systems would take forever, and we would lose the motivating aspect. Well, AI, among other things, I think creates not only the necessity, but also the opportunity to sort of get your act together when it comes to those systems and processes issues. So that, I think, is what you see going on there. But once you do that, you're in a position to ask yourself the important sales and strategy questions, which is what kind of sales are important for accreting enterprise value in our company? And that's ultimately what a comp system should do.
To your point, sounds a little hard. Like, it's almost like if we just get the volume in here, we'll sort it out on the other side. We'll let a customer attrite if we have to. But potentially there's some damage done to the business if you just don't bring good business in all the time. But you also don't want to slow down sales cycles, to your point, and have people second guess an opportunity. Again, it's just like hunt it, kill it. If you open it up and it's got infections, we just can't eat it. Is that part of what's going on right now?
Oh, I think so. And by the way, I think there are always costs to doing that. I think that what happens to the company, not possibly or probably, but inevitably under that system, the company becomes what I call a global mediocrity. In other words, it's pretty good at doing lots of different things with lots of different types of customers, but it's not very good at any subset of those things. And whatever else you learn about strategy is being really good, better than others at things that matter to your target customers. So there is a cost to this. Sales, by the way, doesn't bear that cost in that system, but the enterprise does.
What if your next big revenue move didn't come from a blog post or a cold LinkedIn scroll, but from a real conversation with leaders who've been there?
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
Meet Emblaze, a community of sharp B2B minds, CROs, CSOs, rising stars, sharing what's actually working in sales, enablement, and customer growth.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside of other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Join a monthly forum, dig into science-backed strategy, and get insight you won't find in your feed. Start your Emblaze journey today at emblazegrowth.com.
All right, so we've unpacked a little bit, but I know we always just scratch the surface on things like comp and the impact downstream. But you said something, I wrote down a note. I love when you said our planning cycles need to respond in market time, not planning time, and our planning time is too long for the changes that happen in the market. How does our audience here, sales leaders, managers, what do they do about that? What can they own in that versus like, oh, that's somebody else's job?
Well, I mean, I do think, first rule of sales, both internally and externally, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I am in favor of complaining. Let the higher ups know about this. But then at the end of the day, when you're in sales, I think you learn early on the wisdom of the so-called serenity prayer, let me control the things I can control. And here I think the key mechanisms available to sales managers and sales leaders are account reviews and performance reviews. And by the way, in my experience with companies, and at this point in my career, I don't have to apologize. I've been around the block many, many times with many companies around the world. Performance reviews are probably the most underutilized lever for affecting behavior in most sales organizations. Sales managers are busy, and too many of them do what I call drive-by reviews. And I think that's destructive, because when they do that, they not only perpetuate a culture of underperformance, but equally important, they're inhibiting the flow of vital information throughout the company. Let me get back to something we discussed earlier, Tim. CRM data, that central system, is typically very, very noisy. The real-time information about customers and buying, while the planning cycle is taking its lumbering pace, that information is typically lodged in the heads of the salespeople and the account managers. And it only becomes visible when you do a good account review or performance review. And that's what a sales leader's responsibility is. So that would be the first and foremost thing that I would point to. And by the way, this is, unlike most talk about leadership, this is not metaphysical. Doing good reviews is a very, very trainable skill.
When hype starts, it's those things that seem to languish or fall by the wayside. But I also think you just might have single-handedly spiked sales at successories. And I think the two things, account review and performance review, really the two jobs of a sales leader is to manage pipeline well, make it predictable and consistent, equals account reviews and deal reviews. And then the other is to develop and cultivate the seller to be successful, achieve quota, performance review. So if you really think of your job, predictable, manageable, consistent pipeline, and high performer, the root of that is what are you measuring, how are you reporting, and how are you coaching and encouraging?
If I could just add to that, doing it, you do the reviews so that you can identify and help develop the leading indicators, not the lagging indicators. A sale is a lagging indicator. It's an outcome. The reviews are about managing today and tomorrow, not the past. That's gone. Nothing we can do about that.
So is there something a manager, if you're looking forward, what skill do they need to possess that helps them know what good looks like and make their people better? Because it can't be just work harder, grind, show me more activity. Like, I would love to know, what's that missing personal skill I as a manager need to have that I can impart that would be the unlock for some growth, do you think?
Sales is very context specific, right? I mean, selling software is different than selling capital goods, different than selling professional services and so on. Selling in North America is different than selling in Latin America or the Middle East. So context counts. Number one is we got to understand our context. But number two, again, I get back to the fundamentals. We've got to understand what's driving our sales model today, not yesterday. I always go back, my career, I was a professor at Harvard Business School, left, ran a business for a decade, came back. And one of the things I'm so grateful to Harvard about, at least in my generation, we were forced to write case studies. And to be blunt, that's how I learned so much about business beyond the models that I studied in a PhD program. And I always come back to something a senior sales executive said to me when I was brand new. I probably smelled like a graduate student at that point. And I think he could sense who I was. And at one point he looked at me and he said, Frank, let me tell you something you're going to see in your career. Marketing and sales in most companies is managed as it should have been managed 5 years earlier in that industry. because that's the last time the people making the really important decisions were really in touch with how buying works in their markets. And I learned over the years the wisdom of that old codger's comment. And I think that's the issue that people have to deal with. The market has no responsibility to be nice to you, your company, your people, your strategy. It's your responsibility to adapt to the market, and AI accelerates the pace of change out there.
So keeping tabs on how the buyer is changing, how the market is changing, any specific tools, activities that you can recommend for managers and leaders? So for example, how important is a good win-loss program in your mind, where you do that at some level of scale and frequency? Because to your point, you can't do it once a year, take a snapshot and assume it's going to hold. I'm just throwing one example out. You can comment on that example or give me a better one. How do I keep my finger on that pulse and not be 5 years behind?
Well, I think at the front end and the back end. At the back end, I do think win-loss analyses are important. I think they should be institutionalized. We should have a cadence for that. But we also need to have a process. A win-loss review is not simply let's find a hero and let's shoot somebody for the loss. And I always make this recommendation. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with what's called after-action reviews. You know, it actually began in the military. But go to the Harvard Business Publishing website. It's actually very well organized. In the keywords, put in after-action review. Out will come about 30 suggested articles. Pick anyone at random, read it. You will immediately see its relevance to win-loss analyses in sales. And it's a simple, disciplined process that, in my experience, is usually an improvement over most win-loss review processes in companies. So that's at the back end. At the front end, there are now AI tools available, and they're going to get better and better if you've got the data. That basically what the AI tool does, it says, all right, give me data about who your good customers are. And what that tool can do, much better usually than the company can, that tool can then say, if this is who your good customers are, here are others like them that you're not calling on. Those are the two things I think you begin with. And notice they're both within our control. Those tools are not exotic, and win-loss analyses are something we can and should do better.
And would you say, and not just with the seller on the deal, but how important is it to get some buyer feedback in the mix of that? My data shows that buyer feedback and seller feedback on the same deal is actually different 70% of the time. So I'm just curious how you think about that.
Couldn't agree more. You know, I always like to quote, do you know who John le Carre was? A novelist. He would write these spy novels, The Spy Who Came In from the Cold.
Well, it's just one more recommendation I'm taking from this.
You'll enjoy it. Early le Carre is good. But in one of his novels, one of his characters says something I think should be tattooed on a prominent body part of every sales leader. A desk is a dangerous place from which to watch the world. Yes, you got to get out there. You got to talk to them as well. But then what do you do at the back end? Win-loss. What can we do at the front end to get more good people to talk to?
That's my takeaway today, is that there's the after action, but there's also the before the action. And that's going to improve your odds of success when you take action. And again, one of those things that AI could do brilliantly and quickly, and that would take care of some sales strategy too, is if you could identify what you're going after, and AI can help you figure that out and find more like that, then you don't have any excuse for just chasing every cat and dog and ending up in a bad situation with bad clients.
But let me tell you one other unforeseen benefit of that. It is a benefit, although it feels like cold water to many executives. What you find, what I have seen with companies when they use these tools, yes, we now have better lead gen and implicit lead qualification. And guess what? We find that our value proposition is not as strong as we thought it was. Therefore, we improve. That's how a continuous improvement cycle gets accelerated.
We could go on and on, Frank, but I think that what I'm sort of taking away from this is, at the end of the day, you're pro AI in the right places. It will continue to manifest in other places, but there, at least for the foreseeable future, it's contained to productivity and accelerated performance on running an engagement and pointing you in the right direction and availing you of more opportunities. But then it still comes down to you in front of a customer, how you manage, develop a team to be great in front of the customer, and how you get your team ready to run that play in front of the customer. Because again, AI is going to make us all do the same things better. And then the one thing that remains is why we have salespeople.
Especially in sales, but not only in sales. I don't think people are obsolete. You know, part of, we have this hysteria going on about what it's going to do to humanity. Don't worry about that. You can still make more profitable sales if you know how to use the tools.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because we're at a certain point in our careers where we could be like, yeah, glad I was there when humans were useful. Arguably, we are showing all the reasons why, for the foreseeable future, the tool is the tool, and people are going to do what people do when people are buying from people. And you just do that so well and remind us. And it's always like, I feel like I can take a breath. I can take a beat from all the hype I read, all the clickbait. And that's what I appreciate. You're not out there searching for the latest clickbait. You're like, here's something to ponder. And so I thank you for bringing us that today.
Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. As always, a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks again for watching or listening to another great episode of the Emblazers Show. Learn more about Emblaze membership by visiting us at corporatevisions.com/community.